Hi, I'm Mike, owner of the In-Groove in Phoenix, Arizona. We're a retail brick and mortar record store, and today I'm going to go over the best sounding versions of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon from 1973. None of these records really sound awful. It was an expertly recorded record. There's no atrocious sounding copies. There's mediocre copies, and then there's spectacular copies, but there's nothing that's going to hurt your ears to listen to. One of my least favorite copies is the US pressings. I believe pretty much that these records were made from like a bad, maybe EQ tape that was sent over by EMI to Capitol. It just doesn't have the same clarity as the later pressings, UK pressings, audiophile pressings. It's a weird record. The vinyl that Capitol was using in the 70s is pretty atrocious. It's noisy. Pretty easy to spot a first pressing. The earliest pressings of this record had, let me kind of, these are both later pressings. All right, so the earliest pressings of this record, the rim text only went up to essentially the bottom of the triangle. On the later pressings, the rim text went up to the top of the triangle. Also, let's see, on the inside of the gatefold, the earliest pressings had this inner pack patent pending. They're not getting easy to find. Clean copies of this that are complete with the posters, the stickers, they're actually getting relatively hard to find. And it's not, again, it's a mediocre copy sounding record, mediocre record, noisy vinyl, wouldn't be my go-to copy. I've got different pressings. Wally was a mastering engineer at Capitol, in-house mastering engineer. He did most of the earlier stuff. That's kind of the better sounding of the Capitol pressed dark sides. But again, not the best sounding record overall. I've got a couple of UK quadraphonic. I don't have a quadraphonic system, but these for the most part are, I've got them just to have in the collection. Mediocre sounding. Not go-to by any stretch. I've got a bunch of different pressings from around the world. This is from Czechoslovakia. Pretty, mediocre, crappy vinyl. Who knows? That could have been made from an 8-track for all I know. Not the best sounding copy. This is it looks like possibly, South Korean. No clue. It was on my table for around 30 seconds and I knew it was time to take it off. This is a quadraphonic from Yugoslavia. Don't have a quadraphonic system. I'd be curious if this was actually even quadraphonic. Here is a pressing from, God, not a clue on this one, but this actually has a printed sticker. Again, pretty on the bottom tier of the sound scale. Not the copies you want to be listening to first. This is actually a really rare quadraphonic Japanese pressing. Very expensive, very hard to find, complete with the obi. Has the original solid blue triangle, but not really the go-to copy for this record. More of a collector's item than anything. This is the current pressing that was cut by Bernie Grundman from, now this is done from a digital file, but not a bad sounding record. This is the Japanese version of it, but the record itself is cut from the same metalwork. They were all made in the United States. So the sound difference between the Japanese version and the US version is the same thing. It's actually a pretty solid bargain at 30 bucks. I would prefer this over, any of the US copies, any of the third world country import copies. I mean, this is actually a really solid pressing of this record. Done really well. The vinyl is absolutely silent as can be. This is about the best you're going to hear a digital source record sound. These are pretty solid. This is the 40th anniversary that came out. I think it was 2011, around there. 2013 it would have came out. I don't know. It's pretty bad sounding. It's digitally sourced. You know, it's done at the mastering lab, but this is a pretty forgettable version of this record. You know, not the best sounding version by any stretch, kind of on the mid to bottom tier. This was done in the UK. I believe this was in the late 90s, direct metal mastered, virgin vinyl, yada yada. Pretty crappy sounding version of this record. Again, kind of on the bottom tier. This was part of the EMI 100. They did a Pet Sounds. They did some other titles on this, but again, this was kind of the late 90s, you know, made kind of for novelty. There wasn't very much vinyl in print at that time, and you know, the labels themselves weren't doing a killer job of making audiophile sounding records. This is actually the second Japanese version to come out. It had the kind of tan EMI logo. The first Japanese pressing had the solid blue triangle. I borrowed it from a friend. Neither of these are really good sounding records. I'm not a big fan of Japanese pressings to begin with. This, like other Japanese pressings, you've got the boosted treble, that boosted upper end, and you're kind of missing the bottom end. And this record really shines in the bottom end. You know, that drum solo that's, you know, Nick is doing on there throughout the record, you know, during, you know, that drum solo you're going to find on the record, Speak to Me, you know, On the Run. It's missing that deep bottom end. The bass guitar is just missing on these Japanese pressings. And that's where this record, the best copies and the mediocre copies, that's the biggest difference is on the real bottom end, the strong, powerful, room-moving bass, and that upper end, you know, the ride cymbals, the crash cymbals, just the drum cymbals. That's what you really notice on the best sounding versions of this record versus kind of the mediocre versions. It's Nick's drums, and that really makes the record. These are some audiophile pressings, kind of like the Japanese pressing. Neither of these are really any good. No bottom end, way too much upper end, very exaggerated. There's actually two versions of this album. The very first pressing that came out kind of had the straight text where it says original master recording. The later pressing said original master recording with italic text. Both of these now are going for over $100. Really not worth it. Very quiet, clean, JVC super vinyl. Might fool a lot of people because it's an extremely quiet record, but if you don't have that thunderous bottom end on this record, it's not the same. And you don't have it on this. Like a lot of 80s Mobile Fidelity pressings, you're just missing the bottom end. This is the Japanese Prouse that came out, 70s, maybe early 80s. You know, this was an audiophile pressing, kind of Japan's answer to Mobile Fidelity. It was, you know, it's better than the MFSL. It's better than the original Japanese pressing. It's a pretty solid, you know, there's more bottom end in this. It's a pretty solid copy, but it's expensive, you know, not worth the price. This is not something you would seek out because you want, you know, the best sounding copy or even the best sounding budget copy. This is neither of those things. This is, at this point, been bested. It is a collector's item at this point, not the go-to copy. This is the Mobile Fidelity UHQR version that was done, I want to say maybe 81. This is the best of the audiophile produced stuff. This is the best of the Prouse, the standard MFSL. This has all the bottom end that the Japanese versions are missing. I don't think they use any compression on this like was probably used on a lot of other pressings, so you kind of got to turn this up a little bit. It's not cut as hot, but expensive. This record has gotten ridiculously priced. $700, maybe $1,200 at the time of making this video, you'd pay for this record. They made 5,000 of them. It comes with a little hand-numbered certificate inside. The vinyl is exceptional. It's a flat profile. The quality of the vinyl is spectacular, but very overpriced for what you're getting. Now talk about a phenomenal deal. And I think this is actually the third best sounding version of this record. This is the 30th anniversary. That was cut from the original analog master tape by Kevin Gray. This is a spectacular sounding version of this album. The only reason this is probably not the best sounding version of this record is because it was done 30 years after the fact. And I imagine the tape is not nearly in the same quality shape that it was in, and when it was a new record. Dark Side of the Moon has been in print for a lot of years, and it's been a Billboard top seller for decades. So the tape has probably been run to death at this point. And even when this was cut, it's missing kind of some of the upper end. It's got the bass, it's got the bottom end, but it's kind of missing some of the shimmer on the Nick cymbals on this record. I've heard people describe this as overly bright. This is definitely not an overly bright record, but it is an exceptionally well done record and an absolute hell of a bargain. $75 to $100 you're going to find this record for today, and it is exceptional. This trounces over all of the other options, and a lot of them, almost every other copy is getting to be the same price as this. Clean US copies, complete, $50. Mobile Fidelity records, all over $100. Japanese Prouse, a couple $100. All the quads, all the other pressings, they're expensive. This is a bargain. While you can get it, this is the bargain in the bunch. So as it sits, I prefer this, probably the third best sounding over any of the other pressings. Now we get into the best sounding stuff. And the best sounding stuff are kind of a Madrid of UK pressings. And it kind of starts from the beginning, which was the A2, B2 lacquer, and kind of gets crappier sounding from there. But I've got a lot of different various pressings. This is a late 70s, early 80s pressing. I believe it's an A11 copy. Okay sounding. Preferred over the US sounding copy. Preferred over a lot of the audiophile stuff, but still gets trounced down by the 30th anniversary. All right, now the second best sounding version of this album. The second best sounding version of this album is the A3 B3 pressing. If you look in the dead wax, you'll see SHVL 804 A3 B3. This is probably, I want to say, the fourth pressing within this, the UK fourth pressing. There was an A2 B2. There was some variation A2 B3, and then the A3 B3. This is a fantastic sounding record. You'll actually find all the A3 B3s I've ever found have the second label, but I've actually seen some A2 B2s with the second label, and that's really the value if you can find one of those. They don't seem to go for nearly as much money, but they have the lacquer from the absolute best sounding version of this record, which is the A2 B2. Now you got to kind of be careful when you buy this record. The record really needs to be listened to. Some of the stampers, there's a skip on money. So you want to listen to this ahead of time, or if you're buying it online, you want whoever you're buying it from to listen to it for you. You don't want to spend a ridiculous amount of money and then you get a record that skips due to manufacturing defect, and not condition, but just manufacturing defect. I've gone through a lot of copies of this record. Maybe 5 or 6 copies have come into the store in the last 5 years. None of them were that good sounding. I found a pretty nice copy in Europe when I was there 4 or 5 years ago, and that kind of put me on the hunt to find the absolute best version of this record I could. So went online one day, I found a copy being sold on eBay. The guy had listened to the entire album, you know, specialized in rare, high-end rare records. He notated all the surface noise that was on the record, every pop and click that was and wasn't on the record. And I had to pay up for it, but this is absolutely, hands down, the best sounding version of this record I have ever heard. It is unbelievable. The tape obviously was in, you know, it was brand new when this record was made. So it has all the high end, all the warmth, all the shimmer, you know, it just sounds like this record was made today, but it's unbelievably, all the bottom end. This is the record to own, but it is expensive. I want to say I probably paid over $1,500 for this. You know, real clean copies of this record, $1,500 to $2,000. VG plus copies, you're $700 to $1,000 now. You can find beat up copies of this record, you know, $200, $300, $400 all day long. But this is hands down the record to own. The A3, B3 would be a good, you know, it's a real solid second place, followed by the 30th anniversary. But when you're talking bang for the buck, if you want just a solid record, and you know that 30th anniversary probably is about 85% of the sound of the A2, B2, and, you know, real close to the A3, B3. So that's the bargain. I mean, you're going to spend, you know, $75, $100 and get one of the best sounding versions of this record ever made. Or you're going to get a marginally better sound out of an A3, B3 for, you know, a nice clean copy, $300, $400. Or if money's no object and you got to have the absolute best sounding version of this record you could ever own, it is the UK first pressing A2, B2. This is the one to own. All right, guys. Don't forget to subscribe to my videos. I haven't done one in a while, but I'm going to start putting some more out here. Been kind of busy. Shop is expanding, but check out our future videos. Don't forget to subscribe, and until next time.